Hello, and welcome back to Video Games. I'm Tim Rogers. You are watching the Action Button review of Cyberpunk 2077. Let's talk about the graphics. Few sentences more than the preceding set an electronic game enthusiast's blood aboil. Let's talk about the graphics. Few sentences more than this have excited and tantalized generations of technology cravers ever since the first public sentence in which someone started calling them video games. Half the name of the thing tells us they're something we look at. Graphics sell video games. Graphics get GIFs retweeted. Graphics send Kickstarters viral. Graphics sell new GPUs which enable graphics which sell newer GPUs in endless escalation. A lot of us are here just for the graphics. When it's time to ask customers to spend a couple $100 to increment a single-digit number, companies show us graphics. Some people trick themselves into believing they're more interested in talking about the architecture of the plastic than that of the system. A lot of us admit we are interested in the graphics. In so many words, some people say graphics don't matter. These people remind me of musicians who say lyrics don't matter. On the one hand, have you ever heard the lyrics to Stairway to Heaven? On the other hand, I dislike lyrics in general, and I still love graphics. This is why I, for a whole year, once listened exclusively to music in Cambodian. And this is also why I bought an NVIDIA RTX 3090. Did you know that 84% of the game developers listed in a AAA game's credits are artists? That's not true, though you believed it. Both because it's probably not too far from the truth, and because this video is being shot with outrageously expensive red 6K Hobbit cameras. You believed me because of the graphics. Graphics give us a single united talking point. In this world of omnipresent, anonymous public conversation, confronted from all directions by the confounding diverse subjectivity of others, the graphics set gingerly a light down in the darkness and say, "Come this way. Talk about this." Graphics give us an elusive confidence. They tempt us to believe in this one aspect we can count and measure. Backboning this belief is a job interviewer's concept of showmanship. We expect that if the applicant can't bother to wear a suit for us, it must lack, and grotesquely, in many elsewheres. The very idea of the graphics gave Digital Foundry the momentum to reach 1 million YouTube subscribers. Excellent work, my friends. I've enjoyed games despite bad graphics, probably about as often as I've enjoyed games with great graphics. I've enjoyed games with botched, realistic graphics. I've enjoyed games with confidently simplistic, stylized graphics. I loved Final Fantasy VI in 1994 for its realistic backgrounds, and I equally loved Earthbound in 1995 for its visual cartoon whimsy. Meanwhile, I love Final Fantasy VI in 2021 for its retro pixel art, and I love Earthbound in 2021 for its visual cartoon whimsy. If I'm playing a video game and I'm not 100% enjoying myself and I see some nice graphics, I still say, "Wow, those are some nice graphics." When I announced on Twitter that I'd managed to, against all odds, purchase an NVIDIA RTX 3090 graphics card, less than 4 minutes transpired before someone in the replies asked me if it could run Crysis. This is a joke about graphics. Years in the past, a game called Crysis happened. It was very hard for any graphics card on the market to run Crysis. Crysis's graphics looked toward a future where graphics cards would be able to run Crysis. A person purchasing Crysis upon its arrival knew no machine could run Crysis right then, as well as any machine would be able to run Crysis in the future. Since Crysis, many notable games have stepped in to fill this hypothetical question. We dream of better graphics in general, as frequently as we dream of better graphics for a game that we've already played. It is this dream that drives the very nature of our love of the graphics. Every once in a while, a developer aims on purpose to make a video game that currently existing hardware simply cannot fully understand. They do this usually out of thirst for power. If I've understood correctly these past years, no given developer can do this more than once. To release a big graphic, hardware confounding game requires a developer to intentionally sacrifice credibility for conversation, in hopes that that conversation will carry their business ever forward into the increasingly elusive next level. With Cyberpunk 2077, CD Projekt Red messaged early that they intended to ignite a graphics conversation to end all graphics conversations. Of course, the very nature of these graphics conversations dooms them. You don't need to be a graphics Einstein to know that whatever all the buzzwords are at any given moment, no game will ever be able to do all of them at the same time. The concepts of resolution and frame rate, for example, so fundamentally oppose each other that a genuine psychic could not foresee a graphics card that could possibly reconcile them. When Cyberpunk 2077 finally released after numerous delays, virality aspirers delighted in tweeting GIFs of fails. They spread on their bread the butter of the PlayStation 4. Cyberpunk 2077 on PlayStation 4 ran like a disaster ice skating uphill. I saw plenty of people express genuine surprise at this performance, though really, I saw it coming a mile away. The PlayStation 4 was a 7-year-old console at that point. The PlayStation 4's slightly improved second model, the PlayStation 4 Pro, was 4 years old. That's 1 year older than the base PlayStation 4 was when the PlayStation 4 Pro launched. To complicate matters, both philosophically and technologically, the long-anticipated PlayStation 5 had released a whole month prior to Cyberpunk 2077's arrival. Yet CD Projekt Red had, months previous, announced an indefinite delay to the PlayStation 5 version of the game. What happened was this. If you played Cyberpunk 2077 on a base PlayStation 4, you had a bad time. If you played Cyberpunk 2077 on a PlayStation 4 Pro, you also had a bad time, though one slightly better in parts. If you played the PlayStation 4 version of Cyberpunk 2077 on PlayStation 5, you had a much better time, though you did so having to ask yourself repeatedly the whole time why you bought a PlayStation 5 just to play a PlayStation 4 game. I played 20 hours total of Cyberpunk 2077 on my PlayStation 5, and I've got to say, I liked the constant 60 per second frame rate, though that philosophical question was crushing with this PC sitting 2 feet away. I also played about 20 total hours of the Xbox One version of Cyberpunk 2077 on my Xbox Series X, and it ran at a perfect 60 frames per second with better crowd density and lighting than the PlayStation 4 version did on my PlayStation 5, though apparently nobody's actually interested in talking about the Xbox, so we won't. I also played a few hours of Cyberpunk 2077 on my PlayStation 4 Pro just to see if it was as bad as everyone said it was. I was quite able to play through the prologue chapter of the game just fine. It wasn't that bad, though it definitely wasn't the game from the trailers. I think it doesn't make me any kind of rockstar iconoclast to boldly declare that Cyberpunk 2077 on the PlayStation 4 Pro is just fine, though on the other hand, I never played it on the base PlayStation 4, and on the third hand, Bullet Witch for Xbox 360 is literally one of my favorite video games of all time.
No, wait, please. Before you kill me, let me say my prayers, please.
Prayers? You should have done that before.
What I saw in Twitter GIFs convinced me the base PlayStation 4 version of Cyberpunk 2077 was utter filth, though a few longer videos on YouTube showed me it, too, was remarkably just fine for a game running on hardware from literally 7 years ago. Even before I saw that the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X versions had been delayed, I knew what was coming. CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 development team was roughly 1/4 the size of Rockstar Games' Red Dead Redemption 2 development team, and Rockstar only released Red Dead Redemption 2 for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. They didn't even bother releasing a PC version for a whole year. All the trailers showed me that CD Projekt Red was taking a swing at the king and that their game aimed to have the sheer density of Rockstar's cowboy biography simulator. How were they gonna put this thing on 6 platforms, 8 if you count the Xbox One S and Xbox Series S? It just was not realistic. And the first nail in realism's coffin had been the loudly prioritized PC version of the game. My early reasoning told me that the PC version was, in fact, the real version of Cyberpunk 2077, and that the console versions would easily be utterly and impossibly compromised. I don't think I'm any kind of genius or detective for figuring this out. A lot of us thought this. So when the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X versions of Cyberpunk 2077 got delayed, I understood why. You probably did too. They'd aimed for exactly the wrong time for a studio their size to try to do something bigger than a studio 4 times their size had done. And when it turned out the PlayStation 4 version of the game disappointed people, I understood that too. In the marketing, they'd thrown around just too many buzzwords.
The dialogue system in Cyberpunk 2077 is fully gameplay driven.
Cyberpunk 2077 had 4K. It had ray tracing. No PlayStation 5 game will ever have 4K and ray tracing and 60 FPS at the same time. It is comical to think of a PlayStation 4 outputting anything competitive in the same ballpark with either of these buzzwords. Yet CD Projekt Red had, all those years ago, announced a PlayStation 4 game. They couldn't walk it back now. If they'd just have known how big the project would become and announced it first as a PC exclusive, they'd have saved themselves, and all of us, a whole lot of nonsense. Let me also take a second to note how shriekingly ridiculous it is that the PlayStation 5's box has a little 8K logo on it. Come on, man. If that thing can do 8K, I'm a brain surgeon. Months prior to Cyberpunk 2077's release, I announced I'd review it as the finale of Action Button Reviews Season 1. As the cascade of viral public reports of Cyberpunk 2077's various ugly glitches bloomed on social media, many viewers contacted me publicly or privately to ask if I'd reconsider reviewing the game. Several of you presented delaying the review as an option. You said, maybe I should wait until the game was patched enough times to smooth over the snaggliest nonsense brambles. I assured you all then that no, I would not delay the review, both because I had given my word that I'd review it at this point, and because, as you'll perhaps see if you stick around, I had a twist in mind that I felt quite glitch agnostic. Many more of you messaged me, publicly or privately, to point me to a particular glitch you'd found personally amusing. You asked me if I'd use such and such glitch in my review. Many of you graciously sent me footage of these glitches and offered to let me use the footage without crediting you, which I would never do, of course. And I had to tell you all that no, glitches didn't interest me the way they interested other people. Maybe my time working on AAA video games had scarred me. I see a lot of the internet at large as pointing and laughing at glitches as mean-spirited. I know that the majority of people looking at funny physics fail compilations on YouTube are just having a good time. I know that many people enjoy the surreality aspect and appreciate glitches like a sort of modern real-life science fiction art. As a deep fan of Keanu Reeves' performance in 1993's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, I definitely understood the appeal of found object art. It's just that if you scroll deep enough into the comments beneath just about anything on the internet, you find someone there who's not having fun. You find someone down there who unblinkingly types the humorless words, lazy developers. I'll admit, while working on video games, I've hated messengers before. No one walks into a bug tracker without any passive aggression. Someone in QA tells you there's a mistake in this room on this level, and just something about the way they afterthoughtfully included the phrase, "Please fix this," somewhere in their message pushes you over the edge. This is a bug tracker for tracking bugs. I'm not going to just not fix it if it's in my power to do so. We work together. You don't need to say please like you're my boss or my child. And eventually,
How are you?
some of this leaks out into your reply to them when you announce you've fixed the problem, and 2 years later, you can barely sip coffee 10 feet away from one another. Years of this psychic conflict weighs on me and paints my emotions multiple colors whenever I see a joyless troll roll out a humorless instance of the phrase, lazy developers. And I fear for everybody involved. So I bristled from the very first notion of Cyberpunk 2077's attempt at a virtuoso multi-platform launch. I knew there'd be a disaster waterfall of glitches, enough to power many multi-minute compilations, fueling many YouTube channels, and I felt preemptively sad for the conversation. Yet I was thoroughly prepared to ignore that conversation.
I'm already having a shitty day. Don't make it worse.
Previously, when I reviewed the Final Fantasy VII Remake, several viewers in my comments dared to call me a Square Enix shill for not mentioning the low-resolution door texture that had qualified for 24/7 internet talking point status. One guy dared to DM me on Twitter, asking, and I quote, "Can I get an explanation as to why you didn't talk about the door texture in your Final Fantasy VII Remake review? You talked for 3 hours and somehow managed to avoid the topic altogether." I found the question amusing, so I replied. I said that, first of all, you don't open a Twitter DM with, "Can I get an explanation?" That's what Patreon DMs are for. Then I told him I hadn't addressed the topic of the low-resolution door because I presumed that Square Enix would patch it over at some point in the future. Video games are living things now, I told him. Weeks later, he replied to my reply to tell me I'm still waiting for that patch. I asked him if he saw that one door and stopped playing the game at that exact point, refusing to progress further until he learned it was patched. He replied with utter quickness and terseness. He said, and I quote, "I knew you were a shill." Then he blocked me. Now, I don't mean to dunk on that guy, even though he makes it incredibly easy to do so. I even sort of understand where he's coming from. If that door is that ugly, who knows what other blemishes might continue to accumulate like microaggressions until finally the Bronco's back breaks and the game is completely ruined. It just so happens that, at least in so much as I can recall, the Final Fantasy VII Remake does not possess too earth-shattering a smattering of hiccups aside from that one door texture, though really, I can see where that guy's expectations led him. As of this writing, Square Enix still have not patched that door, though with the PlayStation 5 graphical upgrade coming to the Final Fantasy VII Remake on June 10th, 2021, I'm certain the door will be quietly repaired, and my review will assume its eternal, forward-looking evergreenliness. Except for the fact that the game footage in my review is all 30 frames per second. They should have released a PC version first. God's sake. Similarly to my aims with my review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I earnestly yearned for this review of Cyberpunk 2077 to serve as an evergreen time capsule, appealing even to decades hence viewers. I wanted to ignore glitches, pretending I just didn't encounter any, just presuming that they'll all get patched over, even those that probably won't, because open-world games are huge and expensive and made up almost entirely out of problems. In order to review Cyberpunk 2077 in an evergreen manner, I needed to achieve maximum graphics. So to best approximate what the next generations of game enjoyers will consider Cyberpunk 2077's maximum graphics, I decided to get on the PC pony after decades of aspiration and posery. The PC pony, don't you know, is a Shetland-adjacent breed. Leg length need not preclude a single living soul from swiftly setting astride it. In mere minutes, one can graduate from baby school and earn a kiddie pool's worth of the vocabulary needed to carry on any hardware-related conversation in the aisles of your local micro center. One need only type the word Linus into YouTube's search bar to receive, free of charge, the auto-completion Tech Tips. Minutes later, you'll know who Steve at Gamers Nexus is, and less than an hour after that, you'll have learned to ignore Jay's 2 cents. If everything goes well, less than 6 months later, you'll own a computer that, in the hands of a more philanthropically minded individual, could probably cure cancer. I don't mean to say I was a complete greenhorn prior to embarking on the journey of this review. I had built all of my own personal computers over the past 20 years. I played Crysis as early as 2009. It's just, you spend a few years of your life developing a console game, and then the Nintendo Switch happens and reminds you of Mario and Zelda, and then you work for 3 years for a website that caters mostly to console video game players, meaning publishers send you the console version of everything, and your viewers expect to see video footage of the console version. 1 year turns into 3, 3 years turn into 6, and when you finally have enough money in your bank account to play games the real way again, you have this moment where you have to admit to yourself that you are really not sure what RTX stands for, and that you were only just getting used to pretending to know what GTX stood for. After careful consideration of my career trajectory, my daily video editing workload, and the well-documented aspirations of Cyberpunk 2077's developers, I gave myself a budget of $7,777 to build a brand new personal computer with which to play Cyberpunk 2077 on my 77-inch LG C10 OLED television while capturing footage for the review that would serve as a finale for a season that premiered with a review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I do not, strictly speaking, believe in numerology as much as I believe in anything else, though I've been around enough pachinko parlors and slot machine dens in my travels to know that it never hurts to keep a couple sevens in your pocket. I ended up with an EVGA FTW3 Ultra Gaming branded NVIDIA RTX 3090 graphics card, an AMD Ryzen 5950X processor, a Gigabyte Aorus Extreme motherboard, 3 Sabrent brand 4TB 4th generation NVMe solid-state drives, 128 gigabytes of DDR4 4000 RAM, a 1000-watt main gear ignition power supply, 10 Corsair RGB fans, and an NZXT Kraken Z73 all-in-one liquid cooler inside a Lian Li O11 Dynamic XL case. And yes, I went with Windows 10 Professional, because the guy at Micro Center looked at my parts and said, "Do you need a copy of Windows?" And I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Professional, I assume?" And I replied, yeah. Someone on Twitter asked me why I went with the EVGA 3090, and I'll admit, I am a somewhat underconfident individual. So I got scared I was being punked, and I had half a mind to Google around for an intelligent answer. Then I realized the most intelligent answer was just to say, "Dude." It was the only one I could get. And yes, I realize this is the third time so far in this video that I've listed every component in my computer. Don't think I do it again later, though. Please don't get upset if I do. I set a GIF of Tokimeki Memorial's Ayako Bingo Katagiri to loop endlessly on my radiator's little screen, and I went straight to town on Cyberpunk 2077. I loaded up my in-progress GOG save, dialed in Digital Foundry's Alex Battaglia's excellent suggested settings for 4K ray tracing performance on a 3090, jumped on my Yaiba motorcycle, sprinted down a neon-lit, dead television channel-skied urban boulevard of Night City, and just when my coil was reaching the green line, my V appeared, bewitched, Brazilian Jesus posing and bare-butt pantsless, hairstyle flashing in and out of existence above my motorcycle. $7,777 on a machine as big as a refrigerator. And you still can't fight a thing's nature. I saw this coming as well. I knew that even with a personal computer that could guide 40 space shuttles simultaneously to Mars, Venus, and Mercury, I couldn't miraculously wash away from Cyberpunk 2077 the fact that Sony had delisted the PlayStation 4 version just 2 weeks previous. Sony had never delisted a AAA video game from its online platform. This was historical. Despite all my desire to ignore the technical difficulties of the game, its technical difficulties were out there making history. Mundane video game console-specific history, though history nonetheless. My reviews are as interested in history as they are interested in holistically critiquing the core of a game's ambitions, so a conflict swelled in me. I've worked on several video games before, in case you missed me saying that earlier. I know full well the brutality of Sony's certification process. I know that developers ubiquitously abbreviate Technical Requirements Checklist as TRC, both because it's faster to type and because as an abbreviation it looks so much less evil than the cold, robotic, full wordliness of it does. As an independent developer, I nearly ripped my own head off twice during the TRC process, and we were even working with the help of an outside quality assurance firm specializing in minimizing TRC-related struggles. That wasn't even my introduction to Sony's notorious meticulousness. Even then, the weeks-dragging process beat me down and beat me up. I found interesting catharsis in Sony's allowing Cyberpunk 2077 a pass in time for its ballyhooed, much-delayed release date, only to yank it 8 days later after a cascade of player complaints. Yet I knew when that happened that I simply couldn't avoid talking about the disaster in the same breath where I talked about the graphics. On a big 10-pound RGB-lighted fairy carnival of a 3090, Cyberpunk 2077 displays the most wonderful wonders video game developers have yet dreamed of. My decades-past dream of a wide-open world Blade Runner metropolis came shockingly true in all the neon shrillness of our millions of imaginations. Skylines streak by alongside highways by night times. Seedy bar interiors beg for a blasting of Dragula. Thoughtfully composed conversation camera angles gently showcase cutting-edge facial animations. And all the puddles of every back alley, all the stains of every crime hive floor, every window or other hard surface, every hobby prosthetic of every bartender gleams alive with the silky sight of ray tracing. I'm saying it all looked so real. I wasn't sure sometimes if I was looking at my 77-inch television or my dog had made a satanic accident on my real-world living room floor. I'll admit, I only passingly knew what ray tracing was before I played this game. For many years, I knew it as a hypothetical solution for lighting a 3D scene. I understood it like this. If graphics processors became sophisticated enough to allow it, ray tracing would let game engines render real-time lighting more or less automatically while achieving an effect convincing enough to rival the most meticulous work done by hand. Ray tracing was a buzzword in hypotheticality for developers long before it became the backyard football of console hardware manufacturers. Because primarily, ray tracing is good and exciting for developers. It means convincing lighting with less work, meaning they can afford to light more stuff and therefore just go completely wild with it. Before filming this video, I asked Action Button's Truck Hex lead artist Brent Touchdown Porter if he'd fact-check my explanation of ray tracing for me, and he obliged. He mocked up this illustration for us, which demonstrates lighting bouncing off of a colored object, causing some of that object's color to reflect upon the surface of the ground beneath it, automatically. Porter told me that when he was studying art in college, a professor once explained it like this: every object in the world is a mirror. Just some objects are better or worse mirrors than others. Ray tracing lets game developers model this sort of realistic light behavior with monstrous quickness compared to traditional methods. Granted, of course, that the hardware running the game has the power necessary to handle it. Anyway, that's how I understood ray tracing before I lit up Control on my NVIDIA RTX 3090. On my 77-inch 4K television, I played from the beginning to the first tutorial segment, wherein I stopped and stared transfixed at the light playing on the stipply surface of the ground. Strafing left and right for many tens of seconds, I marveled at the effect's brilliance when output at 60 smooth frames per second. Likewise, I lost count of how many minutes of my 177 hours of Cyberpunk 2077 footage consist merely of me strafing in the first-person camera left and right while staring deadly at a puddle or a stain on a floor or a window or a metal surface. Seeing this effect at 30 frames per second with heavy reliance on NVIDIA's deep learning supersampling, or DLSS, through the NVIDIA 2080 Ti in my previous machine had impressed me, though watching it at 60 frames per second in 4K blew my hat clean off. And I wasn't even wearing a hat. Barreling down a highway on a glinty future motorcycle at 185 miles per hour and seeing all that neon casting light against colored walls, bouncing back diffused colored lighting elsewhere, shocked me viscerally with dreams of the future, until inevitably my character T-posed pantsless above the bike again, shattering the sustained excellence of my footage. All the graphics in the world at the tips of your fingers, and tequila still pours like ketchup.
Some things never change.
Yet all this talk of 60 frames per second ushers us headfirst into another problem. This NVIDIA 3090 graphics card has HDMI 2.1. It supports 3840 by 2160 resolution at 120 frames per second. That's 60 frames times 2. Thus, Cyberpunk 2077, in its hunger for tracing rays and 4Ks in the year 2020, requires of every player a firm decision. The oldest battle there ever was. Good versus evil, light versus dark, frame rate versus resolution. For whole minutes at a stretch, I enjoyed Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K resolution and 60 frames per second. More psychotic viewers will perhaps notice the footage throughout this video is rife with dips. Some of you will ask,
Is there something wrong with YouTube? Or are there dips in your footage?
I promise I was using Digital Foundry's recommended settings all along, especially while driving at high speeds in vehicles. The dips I suffered swiftly decapitated any time capsular evergreenity to which I aspired. A dozen hours in, the facade cracked. Digital Foundry's meticulously calibrated settings didn't even go right out the window, they busted straight through the wall. I unfurled that tempestuous settings menu again and again like an eyeball sommelier. Give me a couple more frames here, a couple more shadows here. Ah, a dramatic dialogue? You'll certainly be wanting to keep the improved facial lighting geometry. Will you be shooting these gentlemen or hacking them? Shooting? In that case, might I suggest changing DLSS from auto to performance? Thus and so, my footage became a complete mess. If an NVIDIA RTX 3080 is a fencing foil, my NVIDIA RTX 3090 is a battle axe, and I got better at splitting hairs with that battle axe than a brain surgeon. Graphics were a game for me. Whipping open that settings menu and tweaking a setting or two happened at least as often as I changed my armor or weapons, if not more. Every once in a while, I even turned everything down to the minimal required settings to run the game in 77 inches of rock-solid 120 frames per second. Free indie game idea. Somebody make a game in the style of a circa 1999 3D PC game where you have to open a graphics menu and raise or lower settings to solve puzzles or win combat encounters or make it 16:9 versus 4:3. I feel like this game would be really bad unless designed very carefully by people who definitely don't exist. Nobody's smart enough to make this fun. I consider that a challenge. The people who've played on consoles all their lives are missing out on this valuable aspect of the PC game playing experience, so kind of give that to them. If you can get it through Sony's TRC. My persistent dedication to graphics tweaking sustained me for the duration of my playthrough. I struggled against the bleeding edge for an occasional glimmer of the perfect 60. Frame rate and resolution locked in a grapple on my living room floor, snatching comfort real estate from my own 2 feet. The pursuit of silky sweet 60 burglarized from me much of the nonchalance a console player takes for granted. At moments of 4K 60, I pity those oblivious console fools. When a scene foists upon me the decision to either sacrifice ray-traced shadows or settle for a quote-unquote cinematic frame rate, I envy the blissful ignorance of the happy console gamer. Alfred Lord Tennyson said it is better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Alfred Lord Tennyson never owned a PC. Alfred Lord Tennyson died 101 years before Doom came out. Sitting down later to review my captured footage of Cyberpunk 2077 for the purpose of this review, I knew at last the full shape of my hubris. You can't just make an evergreen review of a PC game. It occurred to me that I had spent all this money on a PC simply so I could buy and play the PC version of this AAA game, and what one gets with the PC version of a AAA game is the promise that later it will be better. The guy on Twitter asking me if my just-acquired 3090 could run Crysis should have been the first clue. PC video game players will joke about any given piece of hardware's ability to run Crysis forever. Much like they'll joke about Cyberpunk 2077 forever. For some reason, I am not enough of a quote-unquote influencer to yet understand. Because PC video game players are less of a community than a support group. I don't say this lightly. I did the research. I'm no famous linguist like Victor Klemperer, who wrote the 1947 book Lingua Terti Imperi, the language of the Third Reich, which studies the transformative, empowering effects that Nazi propaganda had on the colloquial German language. Though I've done a fair deal of analysis, and I can tell you with great confidence that the diction and sentence structure of the average post on the PC Master Race subreddit has less in common with a speech by Adolf Hitler than it has in common with the typical thread on a particular Crohn's and colitis Facebook group I read whenever a poster might ask the rest of their quote-unquote master race if such and such monitor is really worth the several hundred extra dollars. Someone will say, on the one hand, 1440p is only 3,686,400 pixels versus 4K's 8,294,000 pixels. So that means your GPU can push more frames. Someone else will say, you can't actually get 144 frames per second out of any modern 4K games anyway, so the 1440p monitor is the quote-unquote sweet spot. Then the original poster will say he bought the more expensive monitor anyway, and several people will congratulate him because, hey, he made a future-proof call, and there's nothing wrong with that. And besides, you can always run old games in 4K 120. Cyberpunk 2077 may have come out on consoles, though it is filthy with the PC game stain. As a person with over 10,000 hours of experience each with video game consoles, Mac OS, and Windows, I can confidently say that playing on a video game console feels like speaking at your nephew's school's career day. Mac OS is like congratulating a toddler, and Windows is like going to your friend's weed dealer's wedding in a Walmart parking lot. Cyberpunk 2077, top to tail, is absolutely the last one of those. In the world of PC game playing, games exist to sell us the hardware we already bought. I spent $8,000 on a computer. I need to spend at least $500 on every Steam sale between now and 2025 just to feel like I got even 1/4 of my money's worth. I need to light up Dark Forces 2 on the day after Christmas just to confirm that, yeah, that's a lot of frames. I don't need to actually play the game more than 5 minutes. I just need a little affirmation. And that brings us quite unceremoniously to the heart of it. On the occasion of Cyberpunk 2077, I hoped to arrive upon some definitively declarable statement about playing games for the graphics. And I think that's it. 20 years from now, I'll be 62 years old. Lord. And I'll boot up Cyberpunk 2077 just to see it run at 8K, 300 frames per second, and I'll say to myself,
Yeah, that's a lot of frames.
thanks to cloud infrastructure and such, I'll have no problem jumping right into my endgame save and riding my favorite motorcycle down a stretch of highway. I am 100% confident I'll be able to do this because this is the sort of thing I actually do all the time with old video games that I legally purchased. I figure if I'm still doing it at age 41, I'll probably still be doing it at age 62. Listen, nobody played Quake at 60 FPS in 1996, even if their dad robbed banks or worked for NASA. However, today, if you play Quake, and I do, it still counts as retro because I remember how it ran in 1996, and that is the PC gaming experience in a tiny nutshell. In the future, someday, Cyberpunk 2077 will be as much a retro game as Quake is today. I can say with the confidence 25 years of distance gives me that back in 1996, when I first saw Quake, I didn't have any bright ideas whatsoever what games would look like in the year 2020. And today, I can't say what they'll look like in 2046. I'm sure Nintendo will at least have one 4K 60 FPS Zelda at that point, and Call of Duty will still strive for photorealism. I'm sure Madden will look pretty good at this point. Actually, the NFL will definitely be illegal by then. I'm sure MLB The Show will look pretty good, though I can barely comprehend what any of the technical buzzwords are going to be. Maybe that's okay, though, because I think I spiritually get it. I remember a PR representative of Acclaim's All-Star Baseball 1999 telling a TV presenter that their goal was 9 out of 10 people walking into a room mistaking the video game on the television for a televised game of real physical baseball. That PR person laid all his cards face up on the table when nobody else had even finished their first round of betting.
Hard smash to short. The throw. He's out. The throw. He's out.
Here the man had gone and said that his game makers' goal did not involve the quality of the actual player and experience. All they were interested in, according to his sentence structure, was how the game looked from the outside. It's possible he just phrased this clumsily. That's what PR people do. It's possible it was a little slip of the tongue. It's possible he had wholly intended to append a weasel phrase. One of our goals, though he phrased it so cleanly. Our goal is for 9 out of 10 people walking into the room to mistake the video game on the television for a televised broadcast of real physical baseball. What a clean little pearl-sized goal. It'd be a shame if somebody went and achieved it. Well, they won't. Perfectly realistic graphics are as impossible a goal as a game that runs at the highest frame rate and the highest resolution on the day of its release. The human eye will always magnetize toward any unnatural expression of gesture or environment. There's no getting out of this uncanny valley we're in. Yet, to paraphrase Agent Smith in The Matrix, the average game buyer en masse rejected stylized, whimsical cartoon graphics in favor of gritty, realistic graphics. So the conflict rages on. And in 25 years, if you boot up Cyberpunk 2077, it's going to run about as well as it possibly can, even on the most modern displays. Though I guarantee you, it's still going to look, quote unquote, old forever. This casts a pale shadow over the raging discourse about Cyberpunk 2077's glitches and its crunch. I mean, first of all, say what you will about crunch. They did make the credits easily accessible by frequent accident in the game's options menu. All those thousands of work hours poured into a game that bursts at the seams with that many emergent bloopers. All those thousands of sleepless nights collectively suffered for a game that won't be widely enjoyable at its true potential for 5 years anyway. All that stress and all those headaches suffered for a game that won't be perfect until it looks old. I don't have anything perfect, useful, or even helpful to say about crunch. I crunch. I crunch on everything I make. If anyone listening to this right now likes any aspect at all of any of these videos I make, I can attribute it at least partially to crunch. I got here onto my own YouTube channel with my own successful Patreon because I spent every day at my old job working twice as hard as anyone else in the office. I'm not saying I worked twice as well or twice as smartly. I'm just saying I put twice as much time into it. Other people worked 8 hours a day, so I worked 16. I figured I'm probably stupider than they are, and I have less experience being a media person than they do, so I need to work doubly hard to establish a voice and a character for myself. At the end of my 3 years there, even my meticulous spreadsheets couldn't prove that my crunch had had anything to do with my success or failure. Maybe I'd have had more viewers if I'd worked less and lived a little more. Maybe that would have come through in my personality. Maybe I would have been more relaxed and people would have identified with me more. I don't know. All I know for sure is that I got here crunching, and I got stuck here crunching. For my video review of Tokimeki Memorial, I logged a total of 670 hours of work spread out over 9 months, climaxing with 17 consecutive 20-hour workdays during the editing phase of the project. I launched that video on January 1st, 2021. If I'd worked a normal 40 weekly hours schedule, I'd still be working on it right this minute, instead of sitting in front of this camera and reading this script. I'm glad the Tokimeki Memorial video is out, and I'm glad people like it, and I know it wouldn't have been as good, much less successful, if I'd scaled it down and released something 25% as dense.
Goodbye, everybody!
Bingo!
They say of fast, good, and cheap, you can only ever pick two. I bodily took issue with that adage. by working those 17 consecutive 20-hour days. I made it cheap, fast, and good, though at what other cost? Well, the week I started writing the script for this Cyberpunk 2077 review, in the middle of writing a sentence just a few minutes ago about crunch, found myself on the way to the emergency room with heart palpitations. After an EKG, some x-rays, 2 CT scans, and consultations with a cardiologist, a rheumatologist, and an ear, nose, throat specialist, apparently I had had strep throat for about a month. And I did not notice, because me likey the honey herb Ricolas. I spent a whole afternoon, evening, and night in the emergency room being closely monitored for blood clots until early morning. I'm just sitting there in the emergency room thinking about my stupid Cyberpunk 2077 video, waiting to hear if a jagged, crusty chunk of blood is about to enter my brain and kill me or not. At one point, I spent 3 hours sitting in a wheelchair in front of the CT scan room, just not looking at my phone for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Then a doctor comes by and says,
Is there anyone in there?
and I said,
I don't know.
and he just immediately kept walking. 10 seconds later, I was on my phone Googling internal jugular thrombosis and sweating bullets until sunrise. At some point, I saw a notification in my Mount Sinai hospital app that included a doctor's notes saying that I was, and I quote, CF Lemierre's. Google told me CF stands for concerning for, and Lemierre's syndrome has nothing to do with the talking candelabra from Beauty and the Beast. Turned out my right jugular vein was infected, which is something I didn't even know could happen. My jugular vein got infected because my right lingual tonsil was infected. I didn't even know lingual tonsils existed. I told the doctor I had my tonsils out in 1993, the week Star Fox came out for the Super Nintendo. Super FX microchip, man. And he said, oh no, there are more tonsils that they don't tell you about. The lingual tonsils are the secret tonsils. The ones doctors don't see on the tried and true open your mouth and say ah test, no matter how hard they push your tongue down with that chubby popsicle stick. I spent another night in the hospital, wondering if I was ever going to publish this review at all. Genuinely afraid for my life, receiving a dose of intravenous antibiotics that in hindsight probably could have nauseated a Clydesdale. The death fear sustained itself multiple weeks further, during which time my ear, nose, and throat doctor told me I'd regurgitated stomach acid in my sleep, probably because of the antibiotics, causing acid burns over my vocal cords and shrill inflammation in the center of my torso. The doctor prescribed me a proton pump inhibitor to quiet down my stomach and esophagus, and referred me to a gastroenterologist who ordered an ultrasound to check the inflammation and swelling of my liver, spleen, pancreas, and gallbladder. I had an endoscopy and a colonoscopy on the same day, though probably not at the exact same time. That would have been a very talented gastroenterologist to rule out esophageal and colon cancer. My stomach acid reached such a medication-inspired froth by week 2 that even a genuine MD told me, and I quote, to check Reddit for what supplements people with esophageal inflammation find relief from. So it was that I began to daily consume marshmallow root, aloe vera, slippery elm extract, and N-acetylcysteine. It turns out, if you want doctors to call you on the phone, you just need to come down with something producers of the show House forgot to make an episode about. For a month, every new day was a new guy telling me they needed to make sure something else didn't kill me. I had dudes calling me at 8 a.m. like,
Is this a good time to ask some questions about the illness that might suddenly kill you?
I've got to say, that's a stressful working environment. Ultimately, the talking candelabra from Beauty and the Beast did not kill me. Instead of a coffin, I wound up with antibiotics and the purgatorial ending, wherein I have to squirt nasal spray up each nostril every 3 hours in order to, and I'm paraphrasing here, make sure any bacteria washes down into my stomach. You know, at first I didn't like nasal spray. Too many bad memories of youth by the pool. Though after a couple days, I genuinely started to sort of enjoy it. It makes the whole inside of your skull smell like a hospital for 5-6 solid minutes.
How much longer is this going to go on?
In summary, what had started, innocently enough, with a doctor suspecting that a blood clot in my jugular vein was about to blast upward into my brain, causing a stroke, thus wound down to the current state of affairs wherein I thrice daily consume a supplement whose name makes me scared I'm having a stroke every time I look at its bottle. I mean, to be honest, I actually like chewing these deglycerinated licorice root tablets. Every time I chew one, it makes me wonder if this is what root beer tasted like in cowboy times. It's deglycerinated, Jerry. So, even though I didn't die, I spent a not insubstantial period of time thinking I was going to die. Seeing as the mind makes it real, I feel like I've at least earned the right to say provisionally that video games almost killed me. While I was sitting in that wheelchair in front of that CT scanner room on that first night in the ER, thinking about jugular vein clots, I figured I might as well try letting my life flash before my eyes. Take a guess what I saw. I saw these videos. I saw myself working on Tokimeki Memorial in the dark. I saw Cyberpunk 2077 for 200 godforsaken hours. On many days when my tiny dog enjoyed hilarious walks without me in blizzard snow-covered Central Park, I sat in a dangerous posture on a terribly uncomfortable sofa, fidgeting so hard with Cyberpunk 2077's graphical settings that I eventually had to get biopsied for tonsil cancer. Have you ever been biopsied for tonsil cancer? It sucks. The doctor said it was going to take 15 seconds, tops. It took 48 seconds.
Doc.
I know because I sleep with the sound of a metronome in my earbuds. When I Atari-rejectingly told my mom in 1988 that Nintendo was the real video games, what I meant was graphics is video games. When I say in 2021 that video games almost killed me, I say not quite lightly that I have lived for, and I almost died for, video game graphics. So forgive me if I don't want to spend 20 additional minutes making fun of myriad buffoonish glitches in this game. If someone could get Doom running on a pregnancy test in 2020, CD Projekt Red can probably patch over most of Cyberpunk 2077's glitches by 2022 or 2023. And if my tonsil cancer biopsy results are anything to go by, there's a better than decent chance I will still be alive at that point. So right now, today, I do not want to make easy jokes. I want to make hard jokes. I'm not just saying that I want to make hard jokes because that's a quirky turn of phrase. I'm saying it because I mean it. If you've watched any of my videos, you know I dedicate myself to sometimes unhealthy lengths. I just told you about my brush with jugular vein infected related death that resulted directly or indirectly from my self-imposed crunch on the pre-production phase of this review of Cyberpunk 2077. As my life flashed before my eyes that night, I realized I had to make some kind of personal statement about crunch. And it immediately occurred to me that my segment about the graphics would be the place to do so. Because, did you know that 84% of video game developers are artists? It's true. I heard it in a YouTube video. For my statement about crunch, I resigned to lead by example. My typical workday for Action Button Season 1 reviews 1 through 5 followed a general template. I woke up daily at 6 a.m. I drank 2 liters of ice-cold water and then ate a breakfast consisting of legumes, egg whites, and raw or steamed green vegetables, standing up in front of the stove in my kitchen. Then I returned to my bed, propped my pillows up against the wall, and sat upright under the covers. I read a chapter or 2 of 1 or more books. I checked my email. I scrolled down my Twitter mentions. In this way, I filled the hour between waking and starting work with what I called my simulated commute. Here I had extricated all of the good elements of a New York subway ride from the bad ones. At 7 a.m., I sat in front of my PC and began work. Work either involved playing a game, researching, writing a script, logging footage, or eventually editing video. I worked daily from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., at which time I took a snack break. My so-called snack consisted of exactly the same food as my breakfast, which I prepared, ate, and then cleaned up after in one 12-minute period, standing in the kitchen. At 3:12 p.m., I resumed work. Between 3:12 p.m. and 10 p.m., I stopped an average of 3 times daily to use the bathroom. At 10 p.m., I ate an identical meal, sitting up while watching television with my only friend, Mimsy. Mimsy invariably falls asleep within 46 minutes of the beginning of a television program, so we either watched 2 episodes of an anime or one episode of a 44-minute prestige drama. After Mimsy went to bed, I returned to work for just slightly over 1 hour from 10:46 to midnight. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and went to sleep for 6 hours. This brings us to the rough average of 16 hours and 2 minutes of work per day. Occasionally, if a particular task had ensnared me just so, I stayed up past 2 or 3 a.m., though I never failed to wake up at 6 in the morning. I log all my work hours by category and task. I've been doing so for 15 years. It's good to be organized. It's helped me establish and understand my limits. I can tell you with scientific certainty that in the year 2020, I worked an average of 102 hours per week. Though, as I've already told you, I did spend 17 consecutive days in December working 20 hours per day, making a short-term 17-day average of 140 hours per week. After my physio-philosophical brush with death, I resolved to curb my own enthusiasm. For the duration of the production of the video program you find yourself watching right this moment, I woke up daily at 7 a.m. I ate my simple breakfast and conducted my daily simulated commute until 8 a.m. Then I worked from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. and then stopped for a snack. And after the snack, I stopped working. I watched WandaVision. It sucked. I leveled up every job class in Bravely Default 2. That game's pretty good. I went to a clinic and had my fractionated bilirubin checked. My liver function is normal. I had blood tests for rheumatoid factor, and I am happy to report that I do not have rheumatoid arthritis. Yet. I bought this green jacket. I walked my tiny dog Bibithy Bibby Babbis in literally Central Park. I watched The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It sucked. I watched every episode of My Hero Academia. I replayed The Last of Us Part 2 twice. That's a really good game. I showered every day at 6 p.m. I ate dinner every day at 7 p.m. I went to bed at 10. That splits the difference between my primary care doctor and my gastroenterologist's relative to mealtime, bedtime timing. I bought a leather jacket. I bought the shoes I've always wanted. This video you find yourself watching right this moment came about via the efforts of exactly one man working exactly 40 hours per week. I think the results speak for themselves. By which I mean this is definitely the worst video I have ever made. And buddy, you ain't even a third of the way in. If I ain't broke you yet, by all means, keep watching. In other words, hey CD Projekt Red. Next time, instead of a big banner at the top of GOG.com that says 100% of your money goes to CD Projekt Red Group, why don't you try something like 25% of your money goes to CD Projekt Red Group employees? Well, that's my hard joke. In summary, game looks real good. It'll look better later. Some people think game looks bad. Well, I bought $8,000 computer. Also, finally, and most importantly, me likey the honey herb recoilless. Here I'd like to note that if I used a controller for all of the footage you're seeing in this review, I played through the opening chapter the first time with my Zowie FK1 mouse and Philco Majestouch keyboard. I had my mouse on the fastest DPI settings the whole time. Then I looked at the footage and figured somebody, if not everybody, would throw up. So I went back and captured the game from the beginning with a controller. Aiming with a controller sucks. I don't know how people put up with it. I don't know how I put up with it. However, it does make the footage a lot more pleasant to look at on a large television. I hope someone appreciates that. Just like I hope people who love Cyberpunk 2077 appreciate this next segment. I live on a high-action street here in New York, Manhattan. Constantly horns honking, motorcycles, Harleys, choppers, ambulances, fire engines, pigmobiles with the squealer turned all the way up, streaking by like I live in an open-world video game. 7 floors up? Not high enough. 7 stories, 8 stories. I think it takes about 100 stories to silence a pigmobile's squealer. I like it. I think it lends texture to the sound. I've got my microphones placed more or less correctly. I am a Nimrod, though I'm at least a Nimrod of a petty enough degree that I can look up a YouTube video about where to put a microphone. Did you know most videos on YouTube are about making YouTube videos? Did you know this? I looked into it. 84% of videos on YouTube are about how to make a YouTube video. Where's the sequence settings menu in Adobe Premiere? That's a YouTube video. How do I copy paste in Adobe Premiere? That's a YouTube video. I point out the thing about the ambulances and the police cars and the fire engines in each one of these interludinous segments because I know that if I did not do so, 4 out of 5 viewers would presume I had no idea they were able to hear the noise. So let's talk about the graphics. Do you like my particle emitter I put back there? I intended this segment to just be a sort of an ode to video game graphics, a sweeping... I should probably take these glasses off, shouldn't I? Hold on. Glasses, you're getting a little bit of a real-time ray-traced reflections on my glasses. Got a bunch of lights. Looking into getting fancier lights. I'm not a cinematographer. If I have any cinematographers or directors of photography, DPs, as they call them in the industry, if any of you are Dr. Peppers watching this video and you want to help me out, let me know. I meant for this segment to be just a wide, sweeping sort of review of graphics, and I think that it's a real strong first 5 minutes. I don't know if I really said everything about graphics in here. This is how I feel as I'm editing the video, as I come back to, I go back and I paint over each segment with a little bit more editing. Every other week, I manage just cycling back to a finished segment to put another coat of paint on it. I feel like I didn't nail this one. I had a good time with it. I think it's pretty good, and it's good as it is. There's a couple of things that stick out to me. Well, first of all, I want to thank EVGA for sending me this GeForce RTX 3090 FTW Ultra Gaming graphics card. They sent it to me because I paid them $1,800 for it. I actually paid Dave Brown $1,800 because he was able to purchase it. Yeah, he was able to put it in his cart, DM'd me on Twitter saying, "You want this?" I said, "My God, yes." I know that I've already started getting angry messages and comments about my bragging about my PC. I use this PC for work. I understand the LED lights, the RGB lights look pretty stupid. Though those fans were like, I got them for like $8 more than the non-RGB fans. And I figured I wanted to have a lot of good airflow in here. And Steve from Gamers Nexus loves this Lee and Lee. I'm pointing at it because it's like literally 2 feet away. I live in New York, Manhattan. Steve from Gamers Nexus loves this Lee and Lee 011 Dynamic XL case for the air cooling. And I've got a all-in-one liquid cooler in there. I don't say AIO out loud in a YouTube video. Why would I say AIO? Am I old McDonald? Do I have a farm here? All-in-one is faster to say. I'm not typing in an IRC chat room here. I have a liquid cooler in there. I'm looking into upgrading these parts. The 3090 was a real champion for editing this video, and it was a real champion for playing Cyberpunk 2077. It's a blessing and a curse having a good graphics card, as I believe I went to great lengths to explain. The 3090 was definitely very, very, very good for editing video. The thing that is causing me the technical problem on the export process of the video as we speak happens to be the audio rendering, so that has nothing to do with the 3090. I've got it covered, I've got it handled, it's just tedious. I'm recording these in between those. For all my harping on my PC, for all my quote-unquote bragging about my new PC in this video, I don't think it's good enough for editing videos. I told myself I was gonna put this thing together and just immediately perceive, if not hit the wall, I was gonna immediately perceive where the wall is. I was gonna palpate the wall within, I told myself it would be a couple of days. I'd give myself 3 days to understand where the wall is. And then I surely enough did. And it came twofold. One was using Adobe Premiere, feeling absolutely drunk on power versus the 2080 Ti machine I'd had before. This has 128 gigabytes of RAM, so it was, Premiere really loves the slop. Its mutter was a mutter when it comes to RAM. I mean, it goes to town on RAM. It really went to town on the RAM in this thing. Premiere will just take whatever it can get its grubby little horse hooves on. I felt powerful for a bit with this PC, and then that powerfulness just leveled right off. And I'm looking into the possibility that when game PC enthusiasts on internet forums talk about.
32 gigabytes is plenty of RAM, dude. You won't notice the difference.
It's like, you notice the difference if you're doing nonsense like what I'm doing to make this video. I'm handling the 6K footage and chroma key and whatever. I do need an honest to goodness big boy pants workstation. I know that this computer will, the truth is I built it for someone else. Who is the someone else? Maybe we'll find out soon. I will be building myself another computer very soon. I've had this one now, used it, daily drivered it for 16 hours a day for 9 months. About 16 hours a day spent between various projects, 8 hours of which were spent on this video, and another 8 hours on gaming and writing and wheeling, dealing, programming. Learned C++ this year. Did you? I'd say I'm pretty well versed in C++. It was the thing, it was a dream of mine, long held dream. I always wanted to get into that. I talk about using Alex Battaglia from Digital Foundry's minutely, meticulously configured settings that he had settings for recommended for 4K ray tracing on a 3090 for getting maximum FPS. I used those settings to the bone. I don't think that's the expression. I used those settings as he had laid them out. The reason I say that I ended up going in and constantly tweaking was I just kept thinking, how much more can I get away with? Because I turned it up just enough. This is why I say this thing is a blessing and a curse. This is the curse part. I knew I could get away with a little bit more in some cases. And I was capturing, at the advice of Digital Foundry's John Linneman, on an Atomos Ninja 5. So I was like, oh, I've got all this overhead on the PC. It's not all this. Shadowplay is pretty light. A lot of the footage in here was recorded with Shadowplay. Shadowplay, you can get some decent FPS with Shadowplay. You can even get 60 FPS at Digital Foundry's Alex Battaglia's settings most of the time with Shadowplay on and recording, which blows my mind. If you would have told me about that in 1994 when I was playing Doom, I wouldn't have had any idea what you were talking about, because, I mean, you know, what is any of this stuff? Why would I want to record my video games? This is what I would have told you. Though, I was able to get really good frames, even with Shadowplay on. However, when I was unshackled, unburdened, I was like, let's see what this, how many MPHs this baby can hit on the highway. You keep seeing probably these repeated shots of the motorcycle driving down the city. I call that my Mario Kart track. I have this perfect Mario Kart track. Shout me out in the comments if you want me to stream myself driving on the Mario Kart track for an hour or so the week after this comes out. Maybe that would be a fun thing to stream since I'm now free of this video. Yeah, so my Mario Kart track, you're seeing that footage. That was like my test bed for how many FPS can I get, is riding down this Mario Kart track and seeing if I could keep it at 60. And it did stay at 60. You see a lot of hitches probably. Those hitches are when it auto-saves. These Digital Foundry expertly calibrated settings, I'm just like, how much more can I get away with? It was just too temptatious to try to get away with more. And you know, I didn't even know that Alex Battaglia at Digital Foundry knew who I was, much less followed me on Twitter, much less watched these videos until he tweeted at me. And I was like, oh my God, Alex Battaglia at Digital Foundry, I watch all your videos. So shout out to you, Alex Battaglia. Shout out to John Linneman. I just pointed at my computer when I said John Linneman. That's how esteemed that man is in my mind. I haven't talked to any human people for a while because I've been busy with various things. I did watch John Linneman and Digital Foundry DF Retro's excellent PlayStation retrospective video. 3 hours of it, watched it sitting right here on this TV, sitting on this uncomfortable sofa and watching it on this beautiful TV. It was a wonderful experience. And I have this extended segment in here where I talk about crunch and I talk about getting sick and being sick for a long time. What actually you don't know is that I got sick again while editing this thing. The whole thing about how I was only gonna work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week for the duration of this project. But that just kind of fell apart here at the end, where I did end up working 16-hour days for something like 6 straight weeks. It was bad at the end, because that 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week it was too slow. It wasn't working, man. And that's my fault. I don't mean to, I know somebody's probably gonna yell at me for glorifying crunch. I promise, I'm not trying to do that. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to not do it that way. I mean, I'm gonna make this promise much later in this video, though maybe you're watching this on your second time around. The next season of videos is gonna be much different from this one. Completely, very fundamentally different. You'll see what I mean when we get there, and we're getting there pretty soon. Do y'all like how I'm in this ray tracing zone here? I tried to light it like it was a ray traced scene in a video game with ray traced lighting. I actually filmed like a modeled ray trace behavior to try to illustrate what ray tracing is for the segment about ray tracing in here. And then I ended up not using it. I used Brent Porter's illustration. I had like a pink sheet of paper and a white light and a white sheet of paper. It looked pretty cool. It was not filmed as well as this, and this isn't filmed as well as it could be. We're all in a real weird boat right now. Read that. I had a good time lighting this scene though. Again, any directors of photography, DPs, Dr. Peppers watching this, and they want to let me know what I did wrong, what lights I should buy. Tell me, just as long as you're not patronizing about it. And go ahead and be patronizing if you want. Also, one thing I regret in this video was while editing story number 1, I came up with the word de-PlayStationation to describe the Cyberpunk 2077 being removed from the PlayStation Network. And then I came up with that while editing the video, and I just wished I'd come up with it while writing the script, because it would have been funny to have in the script, to say de-PlayStationation out loud. If you watched part 1, and you're watching part 2 as the second part that you watch, first of all, that's a little weird. I think you're actually probably kind of a cool person if you are watching parts 1 and 2, if you chose parts 1 and 2 to be the 2 parts you watch. I think that's a pretty decent configuration. I sort of cuisined them to fit together sort of well. Though if you watched part 1 before you watch this, you know I also talked about de-PlayStationation in my little director's commentary on part 1, so now I'm giving it to you again. If you didn't watch part 1, you don't know what de-PlayStationation is, so that's why I explained it here. I think these interludes are starting to get a little labyrinthian. Maybe I should go. This was your second story, proceed to the end. If it was not your second story, if it's your first story that you chose to watch, you're gonna have fun picking another one. It's okay to watch number 1 now, if you want. You can go backward if you feel like it. Anyway, I'll see you all real soon, by which I mean in a couple seconds.